Welcome to Beyond the Comfort Zone Talking Shit with KING-KAMBUF. This is the deep dive for you, the designer, the professional. The person who really gets that mastery isn't about knowing your discipline, but knowing where all the disciplines, well, where they collide.
Yeah, and today we're cracking open something really specific. It's the Architectural Insights with KING-KAMBUF, the daily interdisciplinary mentorship brief for Tuesday, December 16th, 2025.
And we should be clear, this isn't some theoretical journal.
Not at all. This is a stack of high-stakes intelligence.
Right.
Think of it as a roadmap for the practitioner who needs to deliver, well, not just beautiful buildings, but structures that are resilient, financially sound, and frankly, socially responsible.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really distill what's in this brief. We're going to synthesize the essential mastery you need to thrive in this incredibly complex and regulated world of high-level practice. And we're tackling two frontiers today, two big ones that are moving really fast from the fringe right to the center of design.
The first one is what we're calling acoustic mastery. And this means we have to stop thinking about sound as just a minor comfort issue. We need to reframe it. It's a fundamental challenge of performance, public health, equity, and at the end of the day, risk management.
The silent pollutant.
The silent pollutant. And the second one is temporal mastery.
Right. Time.
Yeah, treating architecture as a sequence of states. So planned, permitted, built, adapted, maybe even resurrected. Time isn't just a line on a schedule anymore. It is, you could argue, the single most crucial design variable we have, especially with major civic capital.
And if you can combine those two.
Well, when you combine them, you get the kind of comprehensive understanding that separates elite design from just, standard practice. You're getting the synthesis of architecture, advanced engineering, and cutting-edge urban policy.
That's what you need for world-class projects.
It is.
So the real benefit for you listening is that we're providing a shortcut. You get the critical why behind all these new mandates, and more importantly, the how. How to preemptively design for compliance, for efficiency, and, for human dignity.
We're basically linking a structural choice you make in schematic design today to a legal liability and a public health outcome 5 years from now.
Yeah.
That's the level of depth we're going for.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we have to start with that huge regulatory shift, the treatment of sound.
So if you sort of zoom out and look at the global industry pulse, this shift is, well, it's undeniable.
It's happening
Everywhere. Historically, acoustics were, kind of relegated to the interior designer's spec sheet, or it was something you dealt with grudgingly after a tenant complained.
A post-occupancy fix.
Exactly. But now you have municipal governments, environmental regulatory bodies, and they're moving sound and vibration from this nuisance category to being regulated design constraints. Sound is actually being defined now as a regulated spatial pollutant.
Wow. Okay, a spatial pollutant. That is a fundamental change in how we classify it.
It's huge.
So when we say that, we're saying that uncontrolled noise, it's literally contaminating the environment around the building. Does that mean acoustic modeling is now on par with something like a traffic study?
It absolutely is, especially in really dense, high-growth cities. We're seeing cities start to mandate comprehensive acoustic impact modeling for big, complex development.
Like a mixed-use tower or something?
A mixed-use tower, a major infrastructure project next to a residential zone. Exactly. Your design submission now has to include quantitative analysis. And it's not just showing how the building performs inside.
It's about the outside, too.
It's how it impacts the ambient noise contours of the whole neighborhood.
So why? Why the sudden regulatory scrutiny? It's a lot of expense, a lot of hassle.
It comes down to one thing, the public health implication.
Right.
Noise is being seen as an externality. It's a burden, a measurable negative consequence that the project creates, but doesn't, pay for.
So if chronic noise leads to stress or, heart disease.
Or cognitive deficits in kids, society pays that cost through healthcare, through the education system. So by treating noise as environmental infrastructure, the system forces the designer and the developer to internalize that cost.
And design to prevent it in the first place.
You have to design for prevention. It's about moving from reactive fixes, like, putting up a highway noise barrier after the fact.
Which never works that well anyway.
Right. To proactive design that manages the noise source and all the transmission paths from the very, very earliest stages of planning.
You're trying to minimize that externality before it's even created.
Precisely. Imagine a big transit hub expansion. The city isn't just looking at the noise from the trains anymore. They're looking at the ancillary facilities, the ventilation shafts, the truck deliveries at 3 a.m., the entire mechanical plant.
Uh-huh.
And they model all of that against existing zoning for a full 24-hour cycle. And that model, that simulation, ends up dictating building setbacks, massing choices, even material specs for projects nearby.
Okay, let's shift to something even more invisible, vibration. This is signal B in the brief, and it feels like we're moving into some hyper-specific engineering territory here. Microvibration thresholds.
This is where performance architecture gets, well, it gets really demanding. We're talking about projects where vibration, even at levels way below what a human can feel, can be absolutely catastrophic.
Like a data center.
The data center is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Server racks, spinning hard drives, they can be damaged or just become inefficient if they're subject to the wrong resonance. Or think about an imaging suite in a hospital.
An MRI machine.
An MRI, a CT scanner.
Uh-huh.
A millimeter of movement can completely ruin a high-resolution scan. So if the vibration exceeds that allowable threshold, the equipment it can't function.
It just doesn't work.
It doesn't work as advertised. We use these things called vibration criteria, or VC levels. They specify the acceptable velocity limits. So a standard office might be fine with a VCA level, but an electron microscope, that needs a super stringent VCE level, which is barely measurable.
So what's the big takeaway for the architect here?
The takeaway is that vibration control is now an architectural form giver.
Okay, explain that. What do you mean by form giver? How does needing to control microvibrations actually shape the building?
Well, the mass, the stiffness, the damping characteristics of a building, they're all determined by the structural system you choose.
Right.
So if you have an ultra-sensitive lab you need to put on the third floor, you can't just use a standard lightweight steel frame. It's too flexible, too susceptible to transient vibrations like, footsteps.
So you're forced into a different system.
You might be forced into an extremely heavy, deep concrete slab structure, maybe with specialized tuned mass dampers or foundation isolation systems. We're talking about isolating the entire foundation on springs or neoprene pads.
So my aesthetic choice, my desire for a slender, column-free floor plate, that gets overridden.
It gets overridden by the physics.
Mm-hmm.
If you need VCE performance, the structural engineer is going to tell you that your slender design is geometrically impossible, or at least prohibitively expensive.
And that conversation has to happen early.
It has to happen during schematic design, right when you're talking about floor-to-floor heights and where the core goes. If the architect moves ahead with a structure that's inherently too light, the only fixes are hugely expensive. You can't just add mass later. It's non-negotiable early intervention.
Which brings us to signal C, and this connects it all back to the social side of things, acoustic equity.
And this is, I think, maybe the most essential piece for any architect working on civic, residential, or school projects.
Yeah.
The research is just so clear. Chronic exposure to high-level noise, especially where you live or learn, is a huge predictor of reduced learning outcomes. And it makes health disparities worse.
And we know that marginalized communities are disproportionately located near these noise sources. Highways, rail lines.
Industrial zones, yeah. If a child can't sleep, if they can't study because their affordable housing unit has terrible acoustic separation from the street or their neighbors, the built environment is actively blocking their path.
Their path to social mobility, to good health.
That's the whole argument for acoustic justice. So now you have public agencies exploring minimum acoustic performance standards for affordable housing.
And these standards are often higher than for market rate buildings.
Often, yeah, because the construction is typically lighter, the density is higher. They're trying to position silence or really a restorative acoustic environment, not as some kind of luxury.
But as social infrastructure.
As social infrastructure, just like clean air and clean water. The ability to have quality sleep, to concentrate, to have privacy. That is infrastructure.
It's about providing a dignified living environment.
It is, but the challenge is huge because good acoustic performance requires mass and complexity, which is often in direct conflict with the value engineering that just plagues affordable housing. The insight here, that silence is a social resource, forces the designer to argue for robust acoustic planning against those upfront capital costs.
And as professionals, we have to be able to make that argument, not just in terms of comfort, but in terms of avoided public health costs and better societal outcomes. Otherwise, the cheaper, louder option will always win.
That is the task. And it demands fluency in the technical solutions.
Yeah.
Which is exactly where we need to go next.
Okay, so we've established the why. We've talked public health, equity, performance. Now let's drill down into the how. The technical distinctions that, if you get them wrong, pretty much guarantee failure. So we have to start with the fundamental diagnostic tool for sound. Why is it absolutely critical for an architect to distinguish between airborne sound and structure-borne sound?
Because they're solved by completely different physics
Yeah.
in different materials. Airborne sound, that's, a voice, traffic noise, it's energy traveling through the air.
Right.
To mitigate that, you need two things: mass and a perfect seal. Because sound will leak through the tiniest crack. That's called flanking transmission. So we use heavy materials like concrete or multi-layer drywall systems to create a sealed, high-mass barrier.
So if I detail a wall with an STC of 60, but I forget to caulk around the outlets, my actual performance just tanks.
It can drop by 10, 15 points instantly. The weakest link defines the whole system.
Yeah.
But structure-borne sound, that's a whole different animal.
It's kinetic energy.
It's kinetic energy.
Yeah.
An impact, a footstep, a dropped weight, a pipe flushing, a motor vibrating. That impact excites the structure itself. The sound energy travels through the solid material, the steel, the wood, the concrete.
And then it radiates out as audible sound in the other room.
Exactly. And your heavy, high STC wall assembly does pretty much nothing to stop that vibration from traveling through the structure to the room next door.
So if my washing machine is bolted directly to the slab,
That kinetic energy bypasses your beautiful, massive wall entirely. The solution for structure-borne sound is decoupling. You have to create a physical break.
okay, so what does that look like?
It means resilient isolation mounts for your mechanical equipment. It means floating floor systems that sit on a resilient layer. Specialized pipe wraps to make sure the vibrating pipe never directly touches the building frame.
That distinction really clarifies why mechanical systems, which is question 7 in the brief, are such a huge source of complaints after move-in. It's a structure-borne failure that people think is an airborne problem.
Absolutely. The residents complain that the noise is coming through the wall, but it's not. It's coming through the roof slab, down the columns, and then radiating from the wall or the ceiling in their apartment.
So the fan on the roof might be quiet itself.
It could be whisper quiet, but if its vibration isolators were installed wrong, or if a pipe is rigidly connected to the frame, that energy travels unimpeded through the whole structure.
Which is why the brief's lesson, coordination beats oversizing, is so important here.
It's everything. You can specify the best, most expensive equipment, but if the structural detail for isolating it is missed, you fail. It's a commissioning nightmare. You've got the MEP engineer, the structural engineer, the architect, but that tiny little vibration isolator spec, that little rubber pad, that's what gets overlooked.
And that little rubber pad could save you from a $1 million lawsuit.
It absolutely could.
Okay, let's talk about timing. Question 2 in the brief really emphasizes that vibration criteria have to be established during the schematic design phase. Why is that phase so critical? Why not later?
Because vibration criteria are inherent to your core structural choices. When you're in schematics, you're locking in the fundamental concept. Is it precast concrete? Is it steel truss? That decision right there directly impacts the building's ability to resist vibration.
So if you're designing a university research lab with super tight VC levels,
And you wait until design development to bring this up, you might find that the structural bay size you've designed or your slab thickness is completely inadequate.
and the fix at that point is massive.
It's monumental. You might have to add intermediate columns or significantly thicken all your slabs, maybe even redesign the foundation entirely. It just proves that old saying, the cheapest line to move is the one you draw early.
It's a perfect example of the cost of latency in design.
Totally. Early planning costs minutes. Late fixes cost millions. And that connects right back to the broader policy view from question 5. Why do urban planners look at noise contours when they're making land use decisions?
Because, as we said, sound planning is preventive planning.
Exactly. They're looking at the 30-year life cycle of the city.
Yeah.
Planners use these noise contour maps. They show areas that are above a certain decibel level, say 65 LDN, which is the day-night average.
They use that to inform zoning.
Right. If an area is chronically loud, they might zone it for non-residential use. Or if they do allow housing, they might mandate expensive mitigations, triple-pane glazing, heavy masonry construction. Because they know that long-term noise exposure impacts public health, lowers the social value of the land, and just leads to more complaints and more demand on public services.
Okay, let's clarify the rating systems. Question 6. This is a big one because getting these wrong is a recipe for failure. STC versus NRC. What's the difference, and why do architects seem to mix them up so often?
So STC stands for Sound Transmission Class. It's a measure of isolation.
Isolation.
It tells you how well an assembly, a wall, a floor, prevents sound from passing through it to the next space. Think of it as privacy. High STC means you won't hear your neighbor's conversation.
And NRC.
NRC is the noise reduction coefficient. It measures absorption. It quantifies how well a material, usually a surface treatment like ceiling panels or carpet, soaks up sound within a room.
So this is about room quality.
It's about clarity and quietude inside the room. A high NRC reduces echo, reverberation, and that general noisy buildup.
Okay, so give me an example. If I build a school auditorium with thick concrete walls.
So high STC, great isolation.
Right. But the interior is all hard surfaces, concrete floor, glass walls.
The room will be a loud, incomprehensible mess of echoes. A terrible acoustic environment on the inside.
But it would be perfectly quiet from the outside.
Perfectly. And conversely, if you use a lightweight wall-low STC, but you cover it in absorptive foam high NRC, the room itself will be acoustically pleasant, but you'll hear everything from next door. The mistake is thinking that any acoustic material solves all acoustic problems. You have to diagnose the problem first. Is it privacy or is it room clarity?
STC or NRC? Isolation or absorption?
You have to get that right.
Okay, that's crystal clear. Now let's touch on question 4, the unheard danger. Low frequency noise. It's not always audible, so why is it so important to assess it in sensitive buildings?
Low-frequency noise, that deep hum from a chiller, the bass from a speaker, the rumble of traffic, it's a problem because of physics. Low frequencies have very long wavelengths.
And long waves are harder to stop.
Much harder. They're better at penetrating barriers, and they transmit much more easily through heavy, rigid structures than high-frequency sounds do.
So my massive concrete wall, which is great for blocking speech, could actually act like a drum skin and propagate that low-frequency hum.
That's a perfect analogy. It can bypass the mass isolation strategy entirely.
Yeah.
And for humans, even if it's below our conscious hearing, chronic exposure to that vibration contributes to stress, fatigue, and cognitive disruption. For sensitive lab equipment, it can totally skew the results.
So the lesson here is not all noise is audible, but it's all measurable.
And if it's measurable, it's having an impact on performance.
Okay, last point on acoustics, the mixed-use challenge from question 3. We're stacking programs more and more in dense cities. Why is this an acoustic decision, not just a spatial one?
Because you are vertically stacking occupancies with completely opposite acoustic expectations. The noise from a third-floor gym-heavy impact noise, weights dropping,
Right.
is devastating to the residential units on the 4th floor. The late-night noise from a ground-floor restaurant's exhaust fan is intolerable for the offices right above it.
So the architect has to basically create acoustic buffer zones. You have to zone the building acoustically.
You need acoustic zoning. Sometimes you can use a program as a buffer-like pudding storage or a mechanical floor between a parking garage and apartments. But when you can't, when you have to stack them, you have to specify a true floating slab system.
The kind you mentioned earlier.
A concrete slab floating on springs or rubber mounts. It's expensive, but you have to absorb that impact energy before it hits the main structure. You simply cannot afford to value engineer these acoustic separations in mixed-use buildings.
That feels like a perfect place to end our acoustic deep dive. We've established sound control is about safety, equity, engineering. Now let's make that shift to the other big theme, temporal mastery.
Right, so we're transitioning from the instantaneous sensory experience of sound to this huge, unfolding economic and structural narrative of time.
Yeah.
And for the elite designer, architecture isn't a finished product on opening day. It's a process. It exists in multiple states over decades. And we have to design for all of them.
This idea in the brief, architecture designed for phasing, not completion. That feels like a new mandate, especially for big institutional or civic projects. What does that actually demand from an architect?
It demands that major projects prove their multi-phase usability during the approvals process. The challenge is huge. Phase 1 can't just feel like a construction site.
It has to be a complete civic asset.
Exactly. Think about a museum expansion or a new university campus. If Phase 1 has the main entrance, the core circulation, and a few galleries, it has to function perfectly on its own. It has to meet all codes and deliver a dignified public experience, even if Phase 2, which has the rest of the collection, doesn't get funded for another 5 years.
That requires incredible foresight. Your circulation has to work for today, but also be ready for tomorrow. Your temporary walls can't feel temporary.
The phasing strategy itself becomes a core design element. It dictates where the service core goes, where the fire separation lines are. You have to design continuity without the continuity actually existing yet.
Okay, let's talk about construction speed. The brief notes that cities are now factoring in the duration of disruption into approvals. Why are they so focused on how long it takes?
Because a long construction project is a massive cost to the neighborhood and the city. You've got years of noise, dust, blocked sidewalks, traffic jams. It erodes quality of life, it hurts local businesses. It's a public cost. And cities are realizing that speed directly translates to a reduced disruption externality.
So, faster to build systems are getting a regulatory preference. Things like modular construction, prefab components.
Exactly. If a modular system can take a project from 18 months down to 9, that's a quantifiable public benefit. So the regulatory environment starts to incentivize that. You might get fast-track permits or density bonuses.
But there's a tension there.
The huge tension. The challenge for the designer is to balance that acceleration designing for speed of assembly with ensuring you still have the longevity and dignity of a permanent asset. You can't sacrifice 100-year durability for a 6-month speed gain.
That must be a constant negotiation. Which brings us to the financial side of time. Buildings as time-based financial instruments.
This is how the capital source thinks. A private developer, a public agency. They evaluate buildings on metrics like time to revenue, time to service, time to adaptability. A building that sits empty or takes too long to phase just bleeds money.
So our design choices have a quantifiable financial value.
Absolutely. If a developer can shave 3 months off the construction schedule through, say, intelligent design for manufacture and assembly, that's 3 months of revenue they start collecting earlier. On the flip side, if a building needs major demolition for a systems upgrade in 10 years, that expensive downtime lowers its present value today.
Which makes flexibility a core financial asset.
It has real, quantifiable value. Designing with wide structural grids, accessible service zones, flexible wall systems, that translates directly into long-term cost avoidance. You're basically turning long-term adaptability into an immediate economic justification for investing in that flexible infrastructure up front.
So the architect is designing the resilience of the financial asset itself.
That's it. You have to master the financial code just as much as the building code.
Okay, so let's dig into the technical side of phasing, using this professional knowledge framework. Question 1 asks why an architect needs to understand phasing as more than just the construction manager's schedule.
Right, because the CM schedule is about logistics. It's cranes, deliveries, manpower. The architect's responsibility in phasing is about statutory compliance and public safety.
That's where the liability is.
That's where all the liability lives. Phasing fundamentally affects life safety, accessibility, and code compliance.
Can you break down that difference between designing for a temporary condition versus a permanent one in a phased project?
Sure. So when the authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ, gives you a partial occupancy permit for phase 1, the temporary conditions have to meet the same standards as the final asset.
The same life safety and accessibility standards.
Exactly. Your temporary ramps must meet ADA slopes. Your temporary lighting has to be adequate. And, critically, your completed phase 1 structure has to have the proper fire-rated separation from the active construction site of phase 2.
So the AHJ approval is a phase-by-phase thing. You're ensuring the occupied part is always a safe, self-sufficient building.
It has to be. You can't rely on future systems. If the main fire pump is in phase 2, then phase 1 has to have its own interim code-compliant fire suppression strategy until that main system is commissioned.
Okay, question 2 brings us back to structure. Why is extremely early structural planning mandatory for phased projects?
Because load paths are unforgiving. If you're adding 3 more floors in phase 2, the columns and foundations you build in phase 1 have to be sized to carry that future load from day 1.
You have to anticipate everything.
Everything. Differential settlement between the phases where the expansion joints go, the exact detailing of every future connection point.
Which brings up that high-stakes choice. Over-design now or plan to reinforce later. What are the pros and cons there?
Over-designing now means bigger foundations, bigger columns, more rebar in phase 1. It's a higher upfront cost, but it guarantees a seamless, low-disruption connection for phase 2. If the delay between phases is short, that's often the preferred route.
And reinforcing later.
Planning for reinforcement later saves money up front, but phase 2 becomes incredibly invasive. You're coring holes, splicing rebar, maybe even shoring up the existing structure. The risk of disruption, downtime, and cost escalation with that approach often just outweighs the initial savings.
Let's talk about the risk to those first occupants. Questions 3 and 7. What specific hazards do they face that the final users won't?
Well, they're living next to an active construction site. That's inherently risky. You've got dust, air quality issues, construction vehicles near public entrances, and they're relying on interim life safety systems.
So what did the architect have to detail to mitigate that?
You're detailing things like protected pedestrian tunnels. You're planning partial egress systems. For instance, if the final code requires 2 exit stairs, but only one is finished in phase 1.
Because the other one is in the phase 2 construction zone.
Exactly. The HHA might require you to build a temporary exterior exit stair or ramp. Or they might mandate a higher level of fire detection, maybe even a temporary fire watch team, until the permanent system is complete.
Life safety is required at all times. You can't compromise on that.
Never. The architect has to detail those temporary conditions as if they were permanent, because they will be under extreme scrutiny.
Okay, final point here. Question 5. The reality of public projects and aligning design with incremental funding from budget cycles.
This moves phasing from a technical problem to a political and financial one. Public money rarely arrives in one big check.
It's tied to budget cycles.
Legislative approvals, multi-year cycles, yeah.
Mhm.
So your design has to be strategically broken down into complete, fully functional, and independently justifiable assets.
So if you're designing a library in 3 phases, phase 1 has to be a working library. It needs a reading room, restrooms, a circulation desk. It can't just be the foundations.
It can't be just foundations and half a wall. No. Each phase has to be a success story. It has to prove the value of the investment, which gives the project champion the political will they need to go back and argue for the next round of funding.
So in that sense, mastering time is really mastering public governance.
And the budgeting process, yes.
All right, we've covered the theory. Let's make this real with the 2 scenarios from the brief that show the consequences when things go wrong. Let's start with the acoustic failure scenario. You have persistent noise issues in a new, mixed-use, affordable housing project.
This is a devastatingly common failure. And it comes right back to that cost conflict we talked about. You have residential over retail, it's built with lightweight framing, and critically, cost-driven value engineering has stripped out all the key acoustic details.
The resilient channels, the decoupled ceilings.
All gone to save a few dollars up front.
So what's the risk amplification here? It's more than just a few tenant complaints, right?
It's amplified exponentially because it's affordable housing. The equity dimension makes it a much bigger story. It gets immediate media attention. You have tenant organizing, the threat of class action lawsuits, and a complete breakdown of trust with the public agency that funded the whole thing.
The brief says acoustic failures erode trust faster than visual defects.
It's so true. You can fix a leaky faucet, but you can't easily fix the chronic sleep deprivation caused by hearing your neighbor's every footstep. It becomes a major political crisis.
So when this happens, what's the professional response? What's the workflow?
It has to be immediate and very sensitive. Step 1 is triage and diagnosis. You bring in an acoustic consultant to do field testing, STC, and IIC measurements to find the exact sound paths.
Is it a design flaw or a construction flaw?
That's the next step, cause analysis. Was the detail wrong on the drawings, or did the contractor just miss a caulk joint or install the resilient channels rigidly?
And the fix must be incredibly disruptive for the residents.
It's awful. The retrofit phase is the most painful part. You're tearing down drywall in occupied units to install things that should have been there from the start. The cost is enormous, often way more than what was saved by value engineering. And step 3 has to be governance and communication. You have to work with the public agency and create a transparent communication strategy with the residents to even begin rebuilding that trust.
A brutal scenario. It really drives home that acoustics is risk management. Okay, now the temporal failure scenario. Phase 2 funding for a public services building gets delayed indefinitely, 5 to 7 years after phase 1 is complete and occupied.
This is the architect's nightmare. The deferred future. Phase 1 was built with all these exposed structural connections, utility stubs, ready for a seamless tie-in, but now that future might never arrive.
And the immediate problems are corrosion and safety.
Right? Exposed steel starts to degrade. Rebar rusts and loses integrity, and on top of that, the building just feels incomplete. The circulation path ends at a bare block wall. It creates this psychological sense of abandonment for the people who have to work there every day.
So what's the critical decision for the architect and the owner at that point?
You have to decide. Do we spend money now to permanently modify phase 1 and make it a long-term standalone building? Or do we just protect the future connections and leave with the awkwardness?
So if you assume the delay is long-term, what's the mitigation workflow?
Step one is a detailed performance assessment. You have to analyze the risks. How long will the waterproofing last on those exposed elements? What's the corrosion rate? Step two is to propose low-cost interim architectural adjustments.
So instead of just a plywood barrier,
You design a dignified, permanent-looking exterior wall finish. You use the budget not for a temporary cosmetic fix, but for robust, long-term weatherproofing of those concealed structural elements.
and crucially, you have to update the documents for whoever comes next.
Absolutely. Step three is update the record documents and expansion guidelines. The original Phase 2 design is probably obsolete now. You have to document everything you've done to protect the building and provide clear instructions for how a future team can safely connect to it. It all comes down to that one lesson. Time is the most underestimated design constraint. You have to design for the probability that the future will not arise on your schedule. #outro.
This has been an incredibly rich deep dive unpacking this intelligence brief from KING-KAMBUF. I feel like we synthesized two just massive areas of professional mastery that really define success today.
Yeah, we covered acoustic mastery. We've established that sound control isn't a luxury. It's integral to safety, performance, and social equity. You have to master the diagnostics, isolation versus absorption.
And then we covered temporal mastery, recognizing that designing across time-managing phasing, construction speed, financial viability, that's really about leadership in the built environment.
It forces you to move so far beyond just aesthetics and basic spatial planning.
So before we sign off, let's revisit those core questions from the brief for your own reflection. On acoustics, how does sound shape dignity, health, and equity in my next building? Am I actively improving public health, or am I creating an externality?
And for time. What should my buildings become over time? Not just on opening day. Am I designing for simple expansion, or am I designing for true, graceful adaptability?
So what does this all mean? I think it means your next project has to be measured in more than just square feet. It has to be measured in decibels and decades.
Yeah.
It means that embracing this complexity, this cross-disciplinary thinking, it's the only way to get to truly world-class architecture.
It requires an anticipatory mindset. You have to design for failure, design for delay, and make sure that the choices you make today are enabling future possibilities, not restricting them.
So here's your final provocative thought to take with you. As you're detailing your next structural system, don't just think about how it expands in Phase 2. Think about how that structure might be gracefully disassembled and how those materials could be reused or recycled in a Phase 3 or Phase 4.
Designing for longevity, but also for resurrection, for circularity across centuries.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the daily interdisciplinary mentorship brief from KING-KAMBUF PS Architecture. We'll be back soon to push you further beyond the comfort zone.